Whare o hotu nui, tēnā koe, ngā pau whakairo o tēnei tūpuna, o ngā whānui o Maruiwi. Nō reira, tēnā koe. He kokonga whare e kitea, he kokonga ngā kau, e kore e kitea. The corners of the house are easy to see, but the corners of the heart and mind, we need the torch of reason articulated by people who can help us think about things we know in a way we haven't before. Such people are here tonight.
Engari te titi e taringi haere ana hei. Whae toko ruara wara ua. Tēnā koa nei he manu. Kei te hua kiwi mahue i te tawai. Ka toro te rā ka huka i runga. Ka hoki mai ki te pau, ka whai uri ki a hau. No kua no koe a ko te ware ra. Te whai au i te tira haere. Ko te hira u whakangaro ana. Ngā hiwi mauna ki hui arau. Ki aringi hea ki te roing mata. Ko te rere au ki ngā ue mutura. Ko au anake rā i mahue i hone. Hei he te rikiritai ki te mātu au. He titiro no atura ki uaue. Ka momotu ki ta whiti, ma waiara e whai atu.
Kia ora.
I'm an Aucklander born and bred, and yet, although I know a little bit about what happened in the Waikato for various reasons, I didn't know a great deal about Auckland pre-1840. I didn't know, for example, that the original people who came to settle on the isthmus in about 1350 were the Waiahoa people, who subsequently really formed the Waikato, or largely the Waikato. And they moved on to Mangakiakia and lived there for 400 years, until about 1750, when Tatau, under their chief Wahiakiaki, and Ngāti Whātua under Tupuriri, descended from the north and entered into a big battle. And Kiwi Tamaki was killed at Big Muddy Creek, which is near Cornwallis or Huia, on the northern shores of the Manukau Harbour. So Tupuriri then took up residence on Mangakiakia and lived there until 1820, when Ngāpuri descended from the north with the muskets and pushed them all into the Waikato. And Ngāpuri then returned north, and the isthmus was largely empty for about 7 or 8 years until Te Wherewhero and Ngāti Mahuta and the Waikato tribes moved back onto the isthmus, particularly onto Awhitu, and took up residence again. I'm sorry to bore you with all of this, but the importance of it is that one can understand perhaps how important it is for tangata whenua to maintain that spiritual link with the Maunga. Their ancestors were there for centuries, and they looked to these mountains as being part of them. So it was pretty obvious that there would be no settlement of any of the claims in Auckland if we couldn't A, do something about the Maunga, and B, resolve the differences between the various iwi. And only they could do that, and they did, and provided all the existing public rights are preserved, which they will be, then it seems to me a win-win for everybody. And at the same time, we're negotiating individual settlements with Ngāti Manihiri, Rehoa, Te Kara, Maki, Ngāti Whātua Rake, which we're making good progress on, and then the 4 hapu from Waikato, Ngāti Tiata, Tamaho, Akitai, and Ngai Taiki Tamaki, and then there are the 11 Coromandel Hauraki hapu, which we're working on too at the same time. So it's a big undertaking. If it works, we'll settle all the claims from just south of Whangarei to Thames. And that would be worth having.
When the tribunal was given historic oversight in '85, can you remember that point? I mean, it must have been significant, if only for the fact that what really happened could now be opened up in a public forum or with public access. And I just wonder if anyone's considered what might have happened if that had never occurred.
Well, it had to open up in '85, because I went to one of the first sittings, which was held in a hotel here in Auckland, not on a marae. And I mean, we thought it was a travesty then. And it was a matter of pressure from outside of the Parliament and constant pressure before the thing opened up in 1985. And once it had opened up under the Longi government, and part of the reason that that opened up was that there was a hui held at Turangawaiwai in 1984, which was pulled together by the National Council of Churches Maori section, at which 6,000 Maori gathered for 3 days. And the pressure from that was then placed, we then made a plea to the government of the day and spent some time with the Prime Minister, David Longi, and from there, things started to change. And I guess we at the time were thankful for the fact that we had someone as amenable as David Longi in Parliament at that time.
Did David Longi know what he was doing? I mean,
I don't think so, but he went along with what we were doing.
No, look,
there's not enough money to go
all the
around.
settlements have 2 halves. One is, and it's equally important, the acknowledgement of the wrong done and an apology on behalf of the people of New Zealand. Without that, there's no justification for the settlement. If you say, well, here's some money and some assets, but we deny liability, well, then you're going nowhere. So that's very important. The cash component or the commercial part of it quite often is far less important, and in many negotiations I had, they didn't care whether it was much at all. It was the acknowledgement of the wrong done, the return of as much land as could be done.
Whānau Ora was born in order to be able to give greater opportunity to those Maori out there who are actually delivering service to their own people, to have greater access to funding, which would allow them to do even more work among their iwi. Up to now, the hoops that you have to go through are unbelievable. And the gatekeepers, in all instances, rather sadly, are mostly white. And the whole philosophy behind it all is individualistic and does not allow for corporate involvement by iwi. So Whānau Ora was born to give some relief to the kind of difficulties that we've encountered over the years. It's not been put to the test yet, and it's still new as yet, but we're hopeful that it will be a means of redressing the loss of sense of sovereignty that our people used to have. Because I don't believe we ceded sovereignty, but we lost it as we got marginalized with the various movements by the Crown since 1840. In whānau ora is, if you like, a state response to restoring some sense of sovereignty.
Whānau ora is I guess, what you might call the fruits of the principle of partnership. Let's not try and define partnership at the moment. So I'd like to talk about what happens when the whole tribunal process, the settlement process, winds down, as it is beginning to do, or inevitably will. 2014 is the government's aspirational deadline. Do either of you think that's realistic for a start, just as a basic question?
Well, the fiscal envelope was rather misunderstood in many ways. What it tried to do was to impose a discipline on the structure and try to ensure that once settlements were reached, that they were final. Without which, we would never have had public support to do what we did. And so the concept was really that each would get a share of the total. And if in 25 years one of them came back and said, I want some more, then the government would say, well, if I give him some more, I'm going to give them all some more. And we're not going to do that. So there was an internal discipline in it which I think was necessary. And then we started off creating precedents as to, well, if the factual situation is that, then that is roughly what it's going to be worth, and so forth. And we followed those benchmarks pretty well. And if we didn't do that, then the ones at the beginning would be unfairly treated compared to the ones at the end. So I think we're getting there. I don't think it's sensible to say, well, 2014's it, and if we haven't settled it, well, you miss out. I mean, that's just not going to happen, is it?
Do people look at the Maori Party and the fact that it's in government, in coalition, and
the Maori Party has actually given
Maori
people a great vision of what's possible for them.
Yeah, I'd agree. What do you think?
Well, there has been a call for a Maori house to stand alongside the European one, a little bit like your church, if I can put it that way, Hana.
Your church?
The Anglican Church has a Maori. I always have a little bit of difficulty with that, but Whata Winiata, of course, the president of the Maori Party, has been advocating that for a long time. But even he, I think, is now saying, and I don't want to misquote him, but reading some of his recent articles, I think he's now saying, with the existence of the Maori Party, a fortiori, in other words, even more so in that it has now gone into a coalition arrangement with the government, the need for a Maori house is now much less. Now, that's okay as long as it lasts that way, but who's to say what alliances and other things, what the future holds? But I mean, there's a skepticism about politics worldwide. It's not just here. And to encourage young people to get involved and to take part is not easy. They're busy doing all sorts of things. But we're pretty fortunate in the structure we do have, and although there's the odd blip every so often, I think the lack of corruption and the dedication of our politicians, quite frankly, if I may say so, is to be applauded. They all work very hard. They mightn't all be...
There probably is corruption, but it's not all that visible.
Well, I was there at the cabinet table for 10 years, and frankly, I didn't
No one passed you a
see
brown envelope.
any.
No one passed you a brown
The only
envelope.
time that ever came up was when Rob Muldoon said, I'm in the right place, but in the wrong country.
Just at a personal level, Sir Douglas, I mean, when you embarked on the path of being Minister of Justice and Treaty Negotiations, you would have suddenly just set foot on a lot more marae and just been in the presence of a lot more Māori people. It must have changed the way you thought about the country you lived in.
Yeah, yes, indeed. I mean, I'd studied at the university a little bit, and I knew people who were involved. I was very close friends with Paul Tem, and he was on the tribunal when it was first established, so I used to see him regularly, and he'd tell me what was going on. So I had an interest. And then I became involved in the National Party policy and development and Maori issues. So, but yeah, no, until I became the minister and realised that I was a novice and a beginner, but I was always welcomed, I was always courteously treated, except in Waitangi in 1995, which is why I've never been back. And I learned a great deal, and I received far more than I was able to give, no question about that. And I had the most wonderful experiences, which just make me emotional even now.
Doug, you probably won't remember this, but when you stood to contest the Remuera seat, I was a part of a party of 6 people that came to an office where you were, and you were talking about running for the Remuera seat. Now, who was there before you?
Alan Hyatt.
Alan Hyatt. And our question to you was, you brought us here, what are you going to do for us as a people?
What did I say? The world. I was a politician.
You didn't actually say much. And that's one of the reasons why
I won.
as you progressed through Parliament and became much more closely involved with treaty negotiations, I sat and remember that conversation. And I think it was some communications advisor in those days that was, I think, promoting you in the city. I can't remember her name.
No, that was a long time ago. But look, it wasn't just in that area. When you become responsible for at the cabinet table, you have to try and know as much as you possibly can, as quickly as you can. And for some it's health, and some it's education and agriculture. It just fell to me to get involved in the treaty. Now, I was very fortunate and I was very lucky.